Hi there, this is Jeanette for Whimsy Stamps. Today's video features a card that I created. It is sort of a Valentine's themed love card that I created. I used distress inks to blend the background, and then I used a butterfly stencil from Whimsy as well as some embossing paste to create the butterfly background. So I have a piece of watercolor paper here, and I'm going to start sponging on my ink. So I'm working on a craft mat and I am building up my colors. So I am being very careful to just put a little bit of ink onto my blending tool and blend it onto the paper. And I'm just gradually building up the depth that way. It helps to do this on the craft mat. It helps also to pounce a little bit of the excess ink off before you start coloring on the card. So this first color I am using is called Candied Apple. And I'll be using another 2 ink colors. So each one takes up about a third of the size of the paper. And this is not going to be a regular A2 sized card. I wanted to go for something a little bit different this time, so it's a little bit shy of that size. Now I'm going to be using some picked raspberry, I think it's called, or yeah, picked raspberry. And I'm going to blend that on, and I'm going to try to blend the 2 colors together so you don't see any line in between them. I'll just shift my paper around there and work on the other side and blend it till it is nice and smooth. So the final color I'm going to be using, I thought at first I was going to use spun sugar, but then I realized it was going to be a little bit too pink, and I wanted this to be more like a coral, to have more of the sort of a warm undertone to it. So I did end up using this color, which is dried marigold. And again, just blending it nicely, using a little bit of that picked raspberry to blend it all nicely together. And then I'm using my distress sprayer and I'm going to spritz it, and I did spritz quite a bit of water onto the card, and then I let it sit for a few seconds, and now I have a paper towel and I'm just dabbing at that paper, and that reactivates the ink and you get this really gorgeous distressed look. So I did let that dry for quite a while. I set it aside and went and did some other things. And now I'm going to be putting the stencil over top. So this stencil is from Whimsy. And I just tried to line up the butterflies so that it looked really pretty on the paper. And I'm taking some post-it tape and I'm just securing the stencil over the card onto my mat. And I'll be using now some embossing paste. And I've had this jar of embossing paste for quite a while, and most of the time, if it doesn't get sort of dirty or doesn't pick up the ink color, you can just take the excess and put it back into the jar. This time I didn't do that because it did pick up a little bit of the color, but you can see I have a palette knife here and I'm just smoothing it over the stencil. And I haven't done this for a while, so I realized you can't really go back and forth. You'll see I went the other direction and I started picking up some of the embossing paste. So really just try to go in one direction and try to get a nice sort of even coverage. And then once you're happy with it, and I guess I sort of fussed with this a little bit. Once you're happy with it, you can just pull off the stencil, and you have the butterflies sort of embossed right on top. And I did take some fine dry glitter and I sprinkled that over top of it while it was still wet, tapped off the excess, and again I set that aside to dry. Now when you're working with embossing paste, you have to remember that right away you have to go clean your stencils, your mat, your palette knife before it dries. So now I'm going to create the rest of my card, and just to let you know, this was filmed like almost 3 weeks after the first part. I ended up getting really ill in January, so it took a while to complete this card, but I got it done. I created a card base that was 1/4 inch larger on each side, and I've adhered my focal point to it. And now I'm going to create a word for the top of my card. I'm using the scripted love word from Whimsy, and I'm cutting that out of some gold foil paper, and I'm using a metal shim just so that it will cut nice and crisply. So I just ran it back and forth a couple of times, and you can see how easily everything pops out. And I really like the effect of the gold foil and using like scripted words. I think it's really pretty. So I'm going to take some multi-matte media to adhere it to my card. So this dries nice and clear, and unlike glossy accents, for example, it dries matte, so you won't see it at all once everything is nice and dry. So I'm just dotting the media all over the word, and then I'm going to put it in place, and I will just put a mounting block over top that to hold it down while it dries. So once it was nice and dry, I decided that I wanted to add a few more details, and I thought it would be nice to add some sequins. So I had like a sequin pack that had different sizes and shapes and materials, and so I just chose a few, sort of place them onto the card, get a nice idea of how it was going to look. And then again, I just took that multi-matte media and I adhered them, and I used my little quick stick tool here, just sort of pick them up, add the glue, and sort of put them back down. I find that's the fastest way to do that. So my card is all done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. A full list of supplies can be found below this video on YouTube or on my blog. Bye.